We are back from the CBB Central podcast after a great episode on Tuesday with special guest Kyle Keller. Thanks to Coach Keller for coming on. Thanks to everyone who's listened to that interview so far. Hope you all have enjoyed it. One thing I've been enjoying, Brad, is that there's been college basketball to watch on TV, thanks mostly to Kentucky playing in their little Atlantis created vacation/tournament that they're playing in the Bahamas. They played the last two nights on the ESPN family of networks. That's been an easy one to stream. There's been a few other international trips that have been able to stream, but it's been good to have college hoops on, Brad.
Absolutely. I mean, I watched both Kentucky games. There was like a 10-minute stretch of game time that was not televised due to like technical difficulties, but besides that, I watched all that. I watched George Mason's second game where they narrowly won on a slippery floor in Spain. And then when I went to go watch Cincinnati, I think, play McGill, a game that Cincinnati won by, I think, 20 points, the stream was deleted. So I think maybe McGill didn't plan to lose as badly as they did or whatever there. But either way, it's been interesting reading up on all these different reports.
Yeah, and before we get into the NCAA news, because I know we want to touch on that, let's just touch on this Kentucky trip because there's kind of the most data points that we've got, just because we've got some good, high definition streams and somewhat of a basketball atmosphere. I know it's like it's the ballroom at Atlantis, but it's where they play Battle for Atlantis. What have you taken away? I think you've watched a little bit more than I have. I've watched some bits and pieces, but I wouldn't say I've watched a ton of either game. What have you taken away so far from this Kentucky team? 2 wins on the board so far in the Bahamas.
So Tyler Herro is really, really good. First game, he didn't shoot the ball from three well, actually turned down some open threes, but he was, getting to the basket. He was hitting mid-range. He was showing off some athleticism. And then tonight, he went off, had 20-something points, was hitting threes, was going, finishing with his left hand, finishing with his right hand, mid-range, catch and shoot. He was really impressive, and he was doing it all. Nick Richards has also shown a vastly improved offensive game. Defensively, he's still kind of a mess, especially closing out and trying to contest on the perimeter. But those are kind of the two bigger surprises. In terms of guys struggling, Keldon Johnson had a kind of a rough game one where he was getting to the rim, he just couldn't finish. From what I saw tonight, he was a little better. And then Reed Travis has had a lot of problems on the offensive end, but he's truly an elite rebounder. Just the way he rebounds out of his area, the way he pursues balls, and he had like 14 rebounds in that first game, and it was really eye opening how aggressively he can attack the glass.
Yeah. On game one, I watched a good amount of the Travis PJ Washington pairing that I've kind of lamented in the past, and PJ hasn't had the weekend or week, I should say, so far in these 2 games that I think maybe some might have thought was coming, given I think a lot of people think PJ Washington would be Kentucky's best player this season. He's been solid. Travis has been solid. I didn't love watching that lineup. The spacing was still a little wonky, but it wasn't too bad. Keldon Johnson looked pretty good to me, just as a versatile wing who's going to do everything for you. Plays with such good energy. The one thing I didn't love, his shot doesn't look all that confident or repeatable. His motion is a little bit funky, but he made 2 threes today, which was big. Obviously, Herro, as you mentioned, has been incredible, and I think he's just that high-level shot maker that they could really use just to keep space on the floor. But his ability to create off the bounce was more impressive than I expected. And then Nick Richards just played with a lot of confidence in the little bit that I saw. He's still definitely raw. But at the same time, he just looks a lot more confident on the floor. And so that's certainly a nice sign. I do think there's going to be times where Nick Richards is on the floor for Kentucky's best lineup. I don't know how that works if you're going to play PJ and then you're going to play Richards and then let Reed Travis come off the bench as this rebounding force. I don't really know how it's going to all kind of shake out in the end, but I don't think I've seen anything from Kentucky that would diminish the hype preseason. If anything, a big win over a legit pro team today in San Lorenzo is very impressive. And I think only good things can really come away so far from this trip for the Wildcats.
Yeah, I mean, in that first game, there were two of 20 from three, and one of those threes was from Brad Calipari, like late, like when the game was out of reach. So for the most part, I mean, they were like 1 for 19 from three essentially. Quade Green and Manuel Quickly from the floor were like 2 for 18 combined or something. But even with kind of those shooting struggles, Kentucky just looks so impressive. Their front court is going to be really dominant with just how athletic and how kind of powerful all these players are. I know Washington hasn't, exploded or anything, but I mean, he's been fine. Like, he's been good. He's just been shooting too many threes. I think something he probably worked on in the offseason. I don't think he's hit one yet. He had like 2 or 3 attempts from corner three in game one, and the spacing is definitely affected by these two big lineups. I know EJ Montgomery kind of projects as probably the most skilled player in that 4-man front court. He was out tonight with like a minor back soreness or something, but they're going to need Montgomery to hit shots. Obviously, Harrell's going to hit shots. And they really need their collection of guards, particularly Quade Green, to really shoot the ball well from three if they're going to, invest 25 to whatever 28 minutes a game for him.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't have much more to say on Kentucky. Let's move on to the NCAA rule changes, because yesterday around noon, we got this big press release from the NCAA. Plastered atop it, as I wrote in my blog post this last night, this morning, depends on where you were in the time zones. Committed to Change was the title of this, and it looked great in theory. It was, oh, look, they're going to let agents, and oh, look, they're going to let like guys return to school after being entered into the draft if they go undrafted. All of these changes that looked to be very positive for the NCAA, and then once you took a look at the fine print, it was once again clear that the NCAA swung and missed, in my opinion, at least. And I'm interested in your thoughts. I think there was some valuable stuff in these rules, and I know most people listening to our podcast have at least done a little bit of due diligence on a lot of these. So I won't bore you guys too much with the details. I was a pretty big fan of some of the stuff in there, especially I thought was really interesting was things like the NCAA getting subpoena-like power by forcing presidents and athletic staff to commit contractually to full cooperation in investigations. I thought that was pretty interesting. But overall, I don't think there's anything too game-changing here. It feels like the NCAA was just going for a quick PR stunt.
So I have kind of 3 major thoughts here. The first one being, I think, contrary to public opinion on Twitter, I think limiting returners, like limiting guys who can return to school, being just guys who are invited to the combine, I think is actually a pretty good move. Maybe if the just combine invites is too restrictive, then maybe like an artificial like composite top 150 prospects by NBA GMs or something. But I don't think that either the NCAA or the NBA, would want to have the option of anyone to return to school, because therefore even more players are going to stay in the draft just to see if they get drafted, because why not? I mean, if you can do it, maybe you get drafted. No harm in staying in the draft if you can just come back. And I don't think that neither the NBA or college basketball would want that, because the NBA would have to kind of do their due diligence on even more guys, probably like in a significantly greater amount of guys would stay in the draft if they could come back to school. Guys like Nogel Eastern and Christian Vital and Cody Riley, who kind of declared in this draft. I mean, they could just stay for another month, even though they have no real shot to get drafted, and the NBA still kind of has to deal with them. The second thing is I don't understand this whole agent deal for the college players where they just have to terminate at the end of the season or something. I absolutely do not understand that. I just don't get what it means. I've tried to read a lot about it, and I just don't get it. And then the third one is interesting tweets today from Jeff Goodman, where Woj had yesterday that USA Basketball had no idea that they were going to be involved in this. And then Jeff Jeff Goodman tweets today that was actually, fake news, saying that USA Basketball didn't know because there was a representative from USA Basketball on the Condoleezza Rice Committee, I guess. And I guess they knew about it. They just didn't want any part of it. And obviously they've been roped into it now, even though that they still don't want that involvement.
Yeah, it just seemed all very poorly planned out, from this agents thing, like, oh, agents, we'll allow agents, but we're going to leave all of these, hindrances that make it almost impossible to get an agent. Like, what agent is really going to commit to a player who's going to return to school anyway? Oh, I'm just going to like pay for your flights and meals for 2 months and then terminate my relationship with you entirely. Like, that'll work. That was horrible. And then, making USA Basketball decide when they hadn't really decided whether USA Basketball wanted to do that, hadn't communicated properly with the NBA regarding the possibility of allowing people to return to school, because there's obviously NBA implications with rookie scale contracts. I know Sam Vecini did a lot of tweeting about that yesterday. Just things of that nature. The official visits change, where you're allowing kids now to take 15 official visits, which is just way too many, but only increasing the number of visits a team can host over a 2-year cycle to 28 from 24. You're going from 5 to 15, but only 24 to 28. It just feels like there were so many things where, like, the NCAA has these ideas, and these are all ideas that people in college basketball have floated around, that they could have easily capitalized on and done the right way and looked good doing it. Now, obviously, there would be a certain group of people, probably myself included, who would say, oh, well, this doesn't really solve the biggest problem of college basketball, which is, the amateurism conundrum. But at least it would be a step in the right direction. Instead, this was just this felt like the NCAA woke up on Monday morning, decided they really wanted to make some changes, drafted up some rules real quick, without any regard for the intricacies that they would require. And so I guess I was just frustrated by the whole process of all these rule changes. And going back to your point, just real quick on the draft guys being allowed to stay in, whether or not you get invited to the combine, my only thought is, for the vast majority, guys who aren't going to get drafted, the schools will know. The schools knew that No-Gel Eastern was not getting drafted. The NBA teams might have to scout them, but the NBA teams may just not scout them if they know they're not going to draft them. Everyone would know that No-Gel Eastern was going back to school, whether he said so in May or said so at the end of June. I don't think it was really going to change too much. So I guess those are my just 2 cents on what you said and just overall on these rule changes.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially on the official visit kind of disparity in terms of increasing the players more than the teams. Is that kind of shifts a lot of power toward like the elite prospects, where teams can't turn down an official visit from an elite prospect. The elite prospect has more potential visits to go on, can like string more teams along, and that will waste visits that could go to more realistic targets. It's easier said than done to say that, a team that could be a 5-star prospect's 9th official visit, it's so much easier to say just turn it down than actually turn down a visit from such a high profile prospect who has AAU teammates or people in that AAU or high school pipeline that you want to recruit in the future. So it definitely kind of skews the balance more to helping this elite 1%, which is what this whole kind of movement is for, is just like these top like 1 or 2% of players who are dealing with all this money changing hands, and it's really going to affect the guys who kind of need college basketball more.
Yeah, I completely agree. Don't have too much more to say on the NCAA rules. I'm sure I've had my reactions on Twitter and in my column that I published. Brad, I know you certainly have had your thoughts as well. And if you're following college basketball, this has been a major story, and everyone is going to have their own take on it. I just don't think that it did much. But there was a lot of also just movement this week in terms of transfers, finalizing destinations, a few freshmen, JUCO players, 2019 prospects making their commitments. Brad, so we just wanted to touch on these real quick on the show. This one going back to last week, Jordan Lathan. This happened within minutes of us recording our last Thursday podcast, and then we didn't want to touch on the Kyle Keller podcast, so instead touch on it here. He commits to UTEP, top 150 recruit whose admission was revoked at Northwestern. Reports were that it was not academic related, so kind of take that with what you will. He got a bunch of offers right after his admission was reversed from high major schools like Louisville, SMU, Texas Tech, and then it went silent for 2 months, and then he just committed on a dime to UTEP. Once again, take that with what it's worth. I don't know what's going on off the field, but I can tell you it's a high-level pickup talent-wise for the Miners.
Yeah, I was surprised that he didn't go to SMU just because SMU's backup point guard, Elijah Landrum, sneaky transferred. So they don't really have a backup point guard behind Jamal McMurray, who's not really even a point guard. He's sort of like an undersized scorer. So I was very surprised he didn't go to SMU. I thought there was a lot of playing time there. But there's certainly going to be a lot of playing time on UTEP this season as their best returning player, I think, is off to Canada, kind of like Jaden Cohey. I don't remember what exact school he went to, but I believe I saw he went to a Canadian school, Isaiah Osborne. And then UTEP's probably going to be really bad this year, but they have all these sit-out transfers coming in the year after where they can be a real threat in Conference USA.
Yeah, just completely agree. I think just regarding the SMU thing, if he was allowed, if SMU wanted him, I don't think he'd be at UTEP. I'll just kind of put that out there, just my personal opinion. But that's kind of neither here nor there. Jerry Baptiste, the year-and-a-half grad transfer who will be eligible in December, commits to UMass. I thought this was a pretty nice get for the Minutemen, just add a big body who can contribute off the bench this year and then possibly their starting center next year.
Yeah, I wrote this up for Busting Brackets when it happened, I think, Monday. But yeah, the most interesting part for me is this 1.5-year grad transfer. To my knowledge, he's the second one, only behind Dwayne Morgan, the former UNLV wing, who had like an injury-riddled career. And then, kind of with all the complications with the injuries and like missing time, it just so happened that he was in this 1.5-year grad transfer. I think Baptiste is more him just like being ahead in school. But good for him. He will report to UMass, I believe, once the first semester ends in Vanderbilt. I don't think he has to wait till the start of second semester, but that's something to be seen. But yeah, he's a big body. He's he's kind of the perfect kind of complement there because Rashawn Holloway is a very skilled big man, but he's never played more than 20 minutes per game in his career. So having a guy like Baptiste who has starting experience, who was in the rotation for much of his career at Vanderbilt, even though he is kind of a flawed player, that's a great pickup to kind of shore up that UMass front line that sorely needed another guy in there.
Yeah, UMass has been looking to fill that scholarship for a while, so they finally do get their man. We'll point out, I believe he's actually number 3. Ibrahima Diallo from Rutgers wound up in Manhattan at the end of last season in the middle as a mid-year grad transfer, and he'll be there this year as well. So number 3 on the mid-year grad transfer. He has a year left, so he's a year-and-a-half grad transfer. Couple more names we want to touch on the podcast today. Jaden Dallaire, another Northeast product, headed out to Stanford in this 2018 class, reclasses in from 2019. Versatile combo forward, helps this team, especially with Reed Travis headed out.
Yeah, I think he was a Connecticut lean in 2019 until he reclassed in 2018. But I mean, I'm always surprised that more people don't go to Stanford just because it's such a good academic school. It's in the Pac-12. It's in California. It's the kind of the perfect mix there. And I guess for Jaden Dallaire, the opportunity was too good to pass up. I'm not sure how much he plays as a freshman. I mean, they have a lot of kind of younger kind of combo forwards like Oscar Da Silva, KZ Okpala in there as well. And then Marcus Sheffield comes back from injury. He's kind of a 2-3. But with Travis out of the picture, there is certainly some minutes for someone to step in there.
Yep, and other few names we wanted to touch on. Khalil Whitney to Kentucky, top 20 recruit for 2019. Was always kind of seen as a Kentucky lean since he basically said as a sophomore in high school that he was going to go to Kentucky if they ever offered him, that it was his dream school. 6'6" wing out of a really good program that Coach Cal has had a pretty good relationship with. beat goes on in Lexington after losing DJ Jeffries. They get Whitney. They've really started to load up on this 2019 class early, and now the big question is, can they get James Wiseman?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Whitney, kind of based on the roster construction for next year, maybe play some small ball four. Maybe Kentucky's a little more perimeter oriented with possibly Quade Green would be back. You throw in Tyrese Maxey, and then maybe Quickly's not a one and done, and you have some really talented guards, and you can really spread the floor more, playing a true wing like Whitney at that power forward position.
Any other names we wanted to touch on? I forgot if there was one more that we.
Andre Hyatt, who 2018 technically, but he's going to redshirt at LSU. Top 150 recruit in 2019. He's a shooter. Tough loss here for Rutgers.
Yeah, Rutgers worked really hard on this one, so to miss out is kind of heartbreaking. But it's what Steve Peichel is going to have to do, is just grind on these kids and really hope that they can eventually pick up most of them. It worked with a guy like Montez Mathis, and it just didn't work with Hyatt. I do kind of question the whole strategy of redshirting a year, reclassing and redshirting, just because I don't see Hyatt as a surefire NBA prospect. There's a very good chance he will be, but when you waste your redshirt year like this, it's not a waste, you're going to develop, but you then lose the possibility, if you transfer because you get boxed out of the rotation, or Will Wade leaves, or if you for instance were to get injured and tear an ACL, all these opportunities where you need that redshirt year, you lose just kind of sitting out instead of going to high school for another year. So I know Hyatt was he originally in 18 and then went to 19 and was coming back? I believe that was what I read.
I think so, but I can't say with certainty. Yeah, I think kind of the biggest thing going in his favor, because obviously he could easily get recruited over at LSU. Look at Brandon Ratchell, who was a similarly ranked recruit, who was just recently recruited over, just even before they got Hyatt. Just based on the guys that they had there already. But with the new transfer rules potentially, maybe by the time Hyatt's a sophomore and wants to transfer, maybe there'll be free market transfers, and he won't have to sit out a year. So it's just maybe that. I'm not sure if he considered that at all, but just kind of that future uncertainty in kind of the NCAA rules could make that risk be less impactful.
That's an interesting and fair point that I did not consider, but I think it's one we kind of have to consider at this point in the college basketball landscape. Let's move on to our deep dives. We have two to do today: Indiana and UCLA, two blue blood programs. As one person in my DMs called it when I told them who we were doing this week, the Steve Alford Bowl. That works for me too. Who do you want to start with today, Brad? UCLA or Indiana?
How about UCLA?
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, I can start with the synopsis, and you get to do the who's coming in.
Oh man,
all those guys. All right. So UCLA last year, 21-12 overall, 11-7 in the Pac-12. Their kind of whole tournament resume was highlighted by a big neutral court win over Kentucky, but they obviously make the NCAA tournament. They get pushed into that playing game, based on a bid thief in Davidson, if I remember correctly. But then they had a disastrous performance in the NCAA tournament playing game against St. Bonaventure, where Aaron Holiday was, so out of control. He was such a disaster, and that kind of inconsistency kind of plagued them the whole season. They were a great offensive team. They shot the ball well. They shot the ball exceptionally well. I think everyone on their roster who kind of played major minutes could shoot the ball, made them a very dynamic offense. But the kind of trade-offs with that, with playing guys like Gigi Gulliman and Thomas Welsh together, is that your defense is kind of average to kind of poor for a high major team. Inconsistency obviously plagued them pretty much because they were so inexperienced and they hardly used their bench. So this was kind of rolling with their top 7 or 8 guys.
Yeah, all good points, and inexperience will once again be a factor with this team. Just kind of looking at the roster, they'll have no seniors on this team, just two scholarship juniors, and Alex Olashinsky and Prince Ali. Then three sophomores in Jalen Hands and Chris Wilkes and Chris Smith, and then two redshirt freshmen, Cody Riley and Jalen Hill, who got caught up in that whole LiAngelo Ball stealing sunglasses in China thing, and then six signees into this true freshman 2018 class, running it down. The number 6 class in the country per 24/7, and it's a very solid group coming in once again. Moses Brown is the headliner by recruiting ranking purposes, a 7-footer from Archbishop Malloy in New York, number 27 in the composite. He's a center who is, a lot of upside. A lot of guys have maybe said he was an overrated recruit by his recruiting ranking, that he belonged more in that kind of 50 ish range. I've seen that a lot from like draft Twitter people like Jackson Hoy, Mike Gribanoff over at the Stepien. But I haven't watched a ton on Brown, but he's supposedly the headliner in this class. Then Sharif O'Neal, the Arizona decommit, and of course Shaq's son, 6'9" forward, who had some great issues, actually just was able to enroll, but he makes it to campus, high level recruit for them. Jules Bernard, fringe top 50 recruit, a 6'6" two guard who is from LA, who's a nice little piece in this class. David Singleton, 6'5" two guard, 85 in the composite. Tiger Campbell at number 90, the former DePaul commit, who ripped the hearts out of every single DePaul fan by decommitting. A point guard who's a little undersized, but has a lot of toughness and a lot of hair too, if you're going to be honest here. And then Kenneth Nwuba, who's out of Huntington Prep, more of like a project center, good size at 6'10", 240 pounds, but in that 250 range in the composite. So not a guy you'd necessarily expect to be a superstar right off the bat.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway there is just all these newcomers and newcomers that are going to be required to play immediately. Guys like Cody Riley, Moses Brown, even like a Tiger Campbell. These guys are going to be thrown into the fire immediately, and UCLA needs them to produce to kind of live up to where some people have them in the top 25, which is much higher than where I have them. I think probably the biggest takeaway in terms of the roster is, last year everyone could shoot threes. I mean, Thomas Wells shot threes, Goleman at the 4, Alex Olashinsky off the bench at that 4, Aaron Holiday was a great shooter. This year, I think 3-point shooting is probably going to be their weakness, where Jalen Hands and Chris Wilkes shot kind of fine percentages, but they're not really known to be great 3-point shooters. Prince Ali was also like an average 3-point shooter, and then the front court players don't have the same level of skill. I think kind of the single trait, like the recurring trait in this group is athleticism. All these guys are super athletic, and that's somewhere that UCLA certainly improved. Welsh and Goleman are not very good athletes. Guys like Moses Brown, Sharif O'Neal, Jalen Hill, Jules Bernard, these are excellent athletes, and that's kind of a kind of change of the UCLA style, and maybe they'll try to play a little faster this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting because they don't have a recruit in this class where you can count on him coming in and being a superstar. No, not even a superstar, but like I don't think there's like a clear this guy will be an all-conference player this year in the Pac-12 guy, like where you would expect that with a top 6, top 7 class in college basketball. It's more because of the depth of this group than it is because of 1 or 2 superstars in this class. It's really going to be fascinating to watch develop, because I think Cody Riley might be like the key to this team. He's this big, bulky 4-man who is a top 50 recruit. He can shoot the ball a little bit. If he could stretch the floor as like a stretch 4 or 5, where you could almost have him like guard 5s to a certain extent because he's so like sturdy against like bigger 5s, and like Moses Brown, who's like a skinnier, more athletic, but 7 feet tall, where he could kind of like spend a lot of time, switching out on the perimeter, being like this versatile front court. I'm really kind of lost as to how they're going to go about the front court. They have a lot of options, but I'm really trying to put it together as to what they're going to do. do with it all, because Riley's a guy who could stretch the floor a little bit, but it wasn't necessarily the most efficient offensive player, at least in his AAU numbers from what I had seen. So I'm really just kind of trying to feel it out. I mean, I think the backcourt's going to be pretty good. I do question whether Jalen Hands is going to be the full-time point guard all year, or if they're going to wind up playing a lot of 2-point guard looks with him and Tiger Campbell. I have like a lot of like general questions about this team, which is why they haven't been in my preseason top 25. But I'm definitely been intrigued the more I've done the research for this podcast as to the potential that this roster offers.
Yeah, I actually had Cody Riley as my X factor for UCLA as well. I kind of compared him to like a bigger LaDontae Henton, where Henton obviously played at Providence. He was like a 6'5", 6'6" wing, but he played a lot of 4, and they have a lot of the same mannerisms. You know, they kind of want to face up in the mid post, kind of rip through, take a couple of dribbles to the left and get to the rim, kind of use their strength and power. But Riley was listed at 6'10" on the UCLA website, which actually surprised me. You mentioned that he does have some skill. He can shoot the ball. And being 6'10", I wouldn't be surprised if he sees a lot of time at the 5, because Brown, while he is a potential rim protector who could anchor this defense, he is very kind of wiry and skinny, and it's probably more of like a long-term impact guy. I mean, I don't remember which team we kind of touched on this or where I made this point, but centers, even when they're 5 stars, a lot of times take a little while to develop. I mean, you have guys like Cameron Ridley, Isaiah Austin, even like a Dakari Johnson, even kind of take a little while to develop and become guys who look like 5-star players in the court. There's a steeper learning curve.
Yeah, I think it's with Brown, it's going to be really interesting to kind of monitor, because you talk about a guy who's 7 feet tall, 7'4" wingspan, was fairly productive on the Under Armour circuit, but he wasn't all that efficient. Only shot 53% from the field. That has to be a concern. If I'm a 7-footer with his frame to only be shooting 53% of the field without shooting any threes. He took 1 3 in a game. He had a game where he was 2 for 13 from the field, 4 for 13. There were some up and downs. I mean, obviously he has some impressive performances, like a 26-point outburst against Grassroots Sizzle in May of 2017 when he put up 26 and 12 on 9 of 11 shooting and 8 of 9 from the foul line. But I would tend to agree with you that I see him more as like a long-term piece than this year high-impact newcomer.
Yeah, and then I think another kind of key to this front court would be Sharif O'Neal, because I mean he is a very good athlete at that stretch 4 spot, and he is known as a shooter. I know a lot of freshmen struggle with their jump shots. Not everyone comes in and is like a Marcus Howard who's shooting like 50% from 3, even though they have a pedigree as a good shooter. Especially I think the guys who are big men and are known as shooters, I think that they may even struggle more out of the gate than a wing player. But he's someone who needs to make an impact right away. I could see them going with O'Neal at the 4 and Cody Riley at the 5 for stretches. That'd be a super athletic, super kind of skilled and versatile lineup, especially on the offensive end there. That could really wreak some havoc.
Yeah, let's just kind of get into this rotation a little bit deeper here, because we have kind of 2 known quantities of like Chris Wilkes will very likely start at the 3, and Jalen Hands will very likely start at the 1. Like he's more of a combo, but I think he definitely will start the season as the team's starting point guard. And then from there, you need 2 bigs and a 2 guard. I'm somewhat inclined to think Jules Bernard starts right away. At that 2 spot is kind of like as a spacer. But I do think there's like a definitely intriguing possibility where Tiger Campbell starts and they can play this 2-point guard look with Hans' ability to shoot the basketball as kind of a spacer in the offense as well.
So I have obviously Wilkes and Hands there, and then at At the two, I think it's still probably going to be Prince Ali. I mean, he's not great, even though he averaged almost double figures last season. I think he averaged like 9 points a game. He's like a solid kind of complimentary piece. A few times I watched him, he was kind of a little too wild for someone that's going to be like the fourth or fifth option on offense. Like a few times he was kind of a little too trigger happy when I watched him. But for a team that kind of lacks experience to begin with, to have a junior who's played so many minutes and has proven that he can produce in the Pac-12, I think shooting guard is probably his to lose. And then I have Riley and Brown as the 4 and the 5 to start. But I think maybe Sharif O'Neal as that sixth man could earn more minutes than Moses Brown. In terms of your sixth man, who'd you have there, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I was kind of going back and forth between having Ali come off the bench as the sixth man or a guy like Jules Bernard. I think your point about Ali, at least to start the season, I think will start at the point at the 2 guard spot, and then a guy like Bernard will come off the ball or come off the bench, I should say. So I think he might be that sixth man, and then the first big off the bench. I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you, the front court rotation of Sharif being the first big off the bench, and then so that's a 7-man rotation. You're probably looking at 2 more. Probably Tiger Campbell gets minutes as that backup point guard for hands, and then you're looking for a 9th rotation piece. Probably Olashinsky.
Yeah, I've always liked Olashinsky from what I've seen. You know, he's a solid stretch 4. Whenever I've watched him, he's played well. He can hit shots. But I don't really see kind of his path to minutes unless Riley really plays a lot of 5. And then in terms of Jules Bernard, so I didn't really know he was that much of a shooter. I thought he was more of kind of like a slasher. So I had David Singleton in that spot because he's someone who seemed more like a shooter and kind of a more natural 2 guard there. And I think shooting is really going to be a premium for this team, even though Singleton's 30 or 40 spots lower in the rankings. I had him as the 9th man with Campbell at 8, Sharif O'Neal at 6, and then at 7 I went with Jalen Hill. I don't necessarily think he's in the top 9 in terms of how good he is on this team, but in terms of if Steve Alford, who likes to usually play traditional lineups, sticks with Brown at the 5 spot, I think Hill is a natural kind of reserve there. I know he did a lot of traditional lineups at New Mexico with like Cameron Bairstow and Alex Kirk, and then last year obviously mentioned like 3 or 4 times already with Welsh and Gulliman.
Yeah, your point about Bernard is fair. He only did shoot 20% from 3 for Compton Magic the summer before his senior year. So definitely an area where he could improve. But I think the talent is in that slasher. I always do kind of give AAU shooters a bit of a bump because generally shooting numbers in AAU are lower than they are in actuality. If he can jump into like the low 30s, he has a chance to really carve out minutes as a kind of a competitive 2-way wing who can hit that mid-range shot, get to the rim, rebound the basketball. So I think I'll lean towards him getting rotation minutes. You feel like I generally do feel like there's like Tiger Campbell's almost a lock for a rotation spot just as a backup point guard.
Yeah.
And then Sharif O'Neal. So like if we were to say our 5 that we both penciled in, you probably have 7 like clear guys who are going to be in the rotation, and then like Bernard and Singleton will battle it out for a rotation spot, and then one more spot in the front court. Seems like kind of like the consensus, at least for me, as far as finding a 9-man rotation.
And then Chris Smith was in the rotation last year. He was the one guy in the rotation that didn't shoot the ball well. He's someone who reclassed kind of late, I think, to join UCLA. So I'm pretty sure he was the youngest player in college basketball last year. So I mean, this would be a perfect opportunity for him to redshirt, and then when presumably Chris Wilkes is gone after this year to the NBA, there would be more minutes for him. And then Olashinsky, I was surprised he didn't transfer until I saw that he's actually a redshirt junior, so he can obviously transfer without sitting out after the season. So I would expect him to do that too because he could really help a good team. I mean, he's a solid player. I think he's from New Mexico, so maybe Paul Weir could add a transfer after this year who could kind of pair with Vance Jackson in that front court.
Yeah, I was just seeing that myself and thinking about that. You could also go to DePaul, and because he's a Law Lumiere kid, presumably played for Shane Heerman, who's the assistant at DePaul now. So that's way far in advance to kind of speculate on. But let's just I'm just going to kind of talk generally on some slight concerns I'm going to have. I mean, you touched on the shooting. It seems unlikely that they'll be a top 50 3-point shooting team the way they were this past season. Like to me, that seems pretty unlikely. But the defense will improve. I think that's extremely likely that they're a much better defensive club. The question for me, I think, is the biggest is not just with the shooting loss, but with the loss of Aaron Holiday, who was so important to how their offense ran. How efficient will they be on the offensive side of the ball? And I'm very high on Chris Wilkes, but Jalen Hands is a guy who still has to show me a fair amount in terms of we obviously recognize the talent that he possesses and the long-term upside. But what do you see from Jalen Hands? Because I don't think there's a more important player on this team, and possibly not a more important player in the Pac-12 than Hands.
So I thought he played surprisingly well at the NBA Combine. I had seen him kind of as one of the more questionable invites to play 5-on-5, but I thought he played pretty well. More based on expectations there, but I think he could certainly be an all Pac-12 player this year. Just bring up who I actually had as the Pac-12 first team. So I had him actually on the second team, but I mean, some of the guys who I have on the first team, like Peyton Pritchard, Jalen Noel, Noah Dickerson, Benny Boatwright, and Chris Wilkes. I mean, he could, he's certainly in that tier, I think. And he's a better shooter than I think people give credit for, and I think he's a better kind of facilitator. He's seen primarily as kind of like an athlete, but I think there is a lot more to his game, and I think he will give them a competent point guard play even when he doesn't live up to the standard that Aaron Holiday set this last season.
Right, I think that's the question. I don't doubt his ability to score the basketball, though he was inefficient last season. It's he was a guy who wasn't a high assist to turnover ratio guy. He was 81 assists to 57 turnovers on the season. He struggled. That whole UCLA offense struggled when Aaron Holiday left the floor, and so I do think it is a bit of a concern for me. How does he manage being the point guard, especially if you're going to play a guy like an Ali and a guy like Wilkes as your 2 and a 3. Now Wilkes, I do think, has some equity as a secondary creator. I've never really been high on Ali's ball handling. I think of him more as kind of like that 3-and-D defensive minded wing who can also step out and shoot the 3 a little bit. But I do feel like there might be value in having a guy who's comfortable handling the ball, comfortable creating offense, getting to the rim, like a Tiger Campbell next to Hands at times this season. Just because I'm not entirely sold on him as like a high level point guard on an NCAA tournament team, which is what they need him to be.
And then we mentioned this multiple times already, but last season the spacing was at a premium when you have a 5 like Thomas Welsh who can really shoot it, and this year that front court spacing certainly isn't going to be there, and then even some of this back court spacing. So Hands it isn't going to have kind of the room to operate that maybe he would have had last year, both next to Holiday and the room that Holiday himself had. But in terms of Chris Wilkes, he's one of my favorite players in all of college basketball. I'm super high on him. I know a lot of people were kind of down on him after his combine performance, but I didn't really see anything too jarring with it. I thought he played pretty well. Maybe it was defensively because I tend to kind of focus on the offense a little too much when I'm analyzing the game. But I think Wilkes certainly has the potential to be an all Pac-12 player, maybe even Pac-12 player of the year if UCLA is good enough I just love his size, his ability to put on the floor, and his ability to hit shots. I mean, it's a great package he has.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch him. I think Wilkes could be like an All-American type if he takes the next step that I think he's able to do. Let's kind of sum this one up here, Brad. Where do you have UCLA nationally? Where do you have them in the Pac-12 going into this season, which is a critical year for Steve Alford, which we'll touch on in a second before we wrap up on this team.
Yep. So first I'll go where I have UCLA, then I'll go in this composite top 25. But so first where I have them fifth in the Pac-12, just behind Arizona State, a team that I'm very high on coming into this year. And I have them on the bubble as an 11 seed, which is the exact same spot that they were this past season. I think this is such a different team. It's so reliant on young players. This isn't your Duke or Kentucky-esque recruiting class where you have these top 5, top 10 talents coming in to kind of make up for the lack of experience. So I think that this team is actually going to struggle a lot more than people anticipate. And in terms of where people have them, literally UCLA has the highest standard deviation of any of the teams included in the top 25 by a pretty significant margin, second most being Oregon. But the highest person has them at number 12. I don't know off the top of my head who that is. I'm just looking it up right now. The person who has them 12 is Aaron Torres from Kentucky Sports Radio, which I think is wildly high. And then quite a few people have them unranked as well. I think 6 of the 16 have them unranked. So they are quite literally all over the board here. But where do you have the Bruins?
Yeah, so I have them. I'm thinking 4th in the Pac-12. I'll definitely have Washington and Oregon over them, and probably USC as well. And then Arizona at 5. I'm thinking Stanford at 6. Arizona State at 7 is kind of like my Pac-12 right now. Outside the top 25, right on that, I think right in that 8 to 11 seed line range would be where I would see UCLA right now. In the tournament, but not all that safe. And I don't know, is that enough for Steve Alford? I think that's a legitimate question. This is not a UCLA program that pats itself on the back on a first 4, or pats itself on the back by getting a 9 seed and coming in 5th in the Pac-12. With the exception of the Lonzo year, and with the also exception of his first year at UCLA, in which he had a ton of talent that he didn't bring in. It was other people's guys. His tenure hasn't been all that impressive. A first 4 last year. The year before was the Lonzo year. Then a 15 and 17 season. The sneak into the NCAA tournament year in 2014-15, where they made it to the Sweet 16, and the 28 and 9 in the first year of his tenure. To me, this is a really big year for Steve Alford. There's already been buzz about Eric Musselman being kind of positioned as a potential hire should things go south at UCLA this season. I think he needs an NCAA tournament to save his job. I don't think there's much chance he survives not making the NCAA tournament. If he makes the NCAA tournament, he probably is safe, but you never know with a program like this. That is such a machine.
Yeah, and then one of their Sweet 16s was when they were playing SMU in the first round, and they got that goaltending call. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier with on a previous podcast with Nevada and Loyola, kind of where how they would have been thought of if last second shots in the first 2 rounds don't go down. I mean, if Yannick Maria doesn't goaltend that Bryce Alford shot, I mean, Steve Alford might already be fired. So just kind of like a bounce here, a bounce here can really do this butterfly effect and really change the whole landscape.
I think that's all I have on UCLA. Let's kind of wrap them up. Yeah. Both of us have them in that 3 to 5 Pac-12 range. Both of us had them as NCAA tournament teams. You had them in?
Yeah, I had them as like the 4th to last team in, as like an 11 seed.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So both have us have them as NCAA tournament teams, but not that clearly. It's going to be an interesting team to watch, and one that I'm going to have to watch a lot of early season, which is going to be difficult given I don't have the Pac-12 network, but that's also an argument for another day. Anything else on the Bruins before we move on to Hoosierville?
Just that in the composite rankings, I didn't mention this earlier, but they come in at number 21 overall, which is one ahead of TCU and one behind Syracuse.
Yeah, I just don't see them as that level team comparative to be, and I'm down on both of those teams around them, and I don't think they're as good as either. So
absolutely not. That's pretty ridiculous. But moving on to Indiana, I'll start with the synopsis before Kevin goes into another huge recruiting class here. But so the first year of Archie Miller was not so hot. They were 71st in Ken Pom, which is higher than I thought before I checked. They ended up at 16-15. And they were 9-9 in a down Big Ten. They were a slow tempo team, which was kind of strange because they have the pieces to play faster. They played a fair amount, especially when De'Ron Davis got hurt. Of Juwan Morgan at the 5. They have kind of these very very athletic kind of 3-4 type of wings that could play down a position and kind of give them a athleticism and speed advantage. But maybe one of the reasons why they didn't play faster was point guard play, where they never got, sufficient play from Devontae Green and Josh Newkirk. Newkirk is gone along with Robert Johnson, but Devontae Green is back, and it looks like he's going to be the starting point guard at least opening day. But maybe one of their freshmen can step in, who you'll mention a little bit. But they were an exceptionally poor shooting team. They were 307th in the country in 3-point percentage and 331st in free throw. That's something if you're going to play small, you're going to need to shoot the ball very well, and it's something that they didn't do. And then they were also kind of poor on the defensive glass with guys like Freddie McSwain and Juwan Morgan and Colin Hartman playing some 5.
Yeah, your point that just really stuck out to me was when you're playing small, you have to shoot the ball. The other thing you have to do is get really good point guard play and take care of the basketball, and that's not really something that Josh Newkirk excelled in. Their assist to turnover ratio was not all that great on the season. So that's definitely somewhere that they'd want to improve. It's a 5-man freshman class for Indiana, headlined, of course, by Romeo Langford, the New Albany, Indiana native, whose recruitment was an absolute circus from the time it began to the time that he committed in a half-hour plus long ceremony that featured comparisons to Abe Lincoln. But this recruit meant everything to Archie Miller. This recruit meant everything to the state of Indiana, to be quite honest with you. This 6'5", 6'6", 2'3", who can really score the basketball at all 3 levels, a potential future lottery pick, very likely a one and done, but hard to understate what it meant for Indiana to keep their best in-state prospect home and one of the best in-state prospects they've had in years. They also have two other Indiana natives in this class, both in the top 150 in the composite, Demezi Anderson from South Bend and Robert Finnessy, who's seen as the point guard of the future, at 135. He's from Lafayette. Both of them in that solid recruit range. Anderson will bring some athleticism. I've seen he definitely has to put on weight, but he has some talent. Finnessy, I wouldn't be surprised if he winds up starting a point guard by the end of the season. Probably not at the beginning of the season, as you said, Brad, but a high-level talent. For his recruiting ranking, there's been a lot of hype. I don't know how much I actually buy into it. I think he's a good prospect. I don't see him as some elite prospect, but in-state products in Indiana tend to get blown up. Then Jerome Hunter, the other crown jewel of this class, is a number 58 in the composite, 6'7" combo forward from Ohio, who's an impressive kid. And then Jake Forrester, a combo forward from Pennsylvania, who really brings a lot of athleticism and switchability on defense, but has a fairly undeveloped offensive game.
Yeah, so I think the kind of the point on Rob Finnessy, I have seen a lot of Indiana fans say that he's gonna, be the opening day starting point guard and be very high on him. We kind of mentioned this earlier with Jordan McCabe on the West Virginia podcast, but guys in that range and Finnessey's ranked even lower than McCabe. They're typically not starting caliber point guards on top 25 to and NCAA tournament teams as freshmen. But Finney does have like that kind of steady floor general skill set where maybe he doesn't have as much upside as a McCabe, who's more skilled offensively. But just trying to just like bring some stability and some 3-point shooting to a team that desperately needs both. I think another kind of big addition, as Archie Miller probably realized that they needed some shooting, was Evan Fitzner, the stretch big from St. Mary's. Only averaged like 5 points a game, but he shot 40% from deep, and that's going to be huge, especially if De'Ron Davis isn't ready to start the season. Pairing Morgan and Fitzner, I think it's an interesting look, especially offensively. And then, in Archie Miller's past, they have played with a lot of wing heavy lineups with playing like a guy like Kendall Pollard at the 5, who was like 6'6", 230 or something.
Yeah, he was like a bruising 4-man who they played at the 5 in like a 4-out 1-in look.
Yeah, and then they had long athletic wings like Dyshawn Pierre, a guy in Charles Cook, who's now in the NBA. But I think Pierre kind of is a similar player to Jerome Hunter, who they have coming in. The comp that I came up with Jerome Hunter from the little I've seen him was Mike Mosier, who played at UNLV and in Oregon, kind of like a lanky, wiry, athletic kind of a combo forward who can handle the ball a little bit, shoots it a little bit, but he's more of kind of like a mid-range kind of like runner and floater type of guy, kind of using his size in that mid-post area. So that was a couple of thoughts there. I don't know if you want to jump into the rotation already or if you had some more general stuff.
I mean, not really. I mean, I think generally this team is this freshman class, and then Davis, Juwan Morgan, and there's not a ton that comes back into this group that is all that inspiring. Devontae Green was like useful, but not all that impressive, to at least in my opinion. De'Ron Davis was impressive when healthy. Guys like why am I blanking here? Like Elijah Durham was okay. I just don't know. I don't know how he'll fit in the rotation this year. It's hard for me to kind of project this rotation from a perspective of these returning guys compared to the newcomers, because with the exception of Langford and even and Hunter, you don't see guys who are in that recruiting ranking that define you as an impact player. But I think Indiana's going to need them, especially Finney, at that point guard spot, to just kind of fill out the rotation and be a body at that spot, because they are thin up there. They would have been an intriguing team to go grab a grad transfer point guard. There wasn't like one that like really made sense to me. But like one of those like steady hand grad transfer point guards, they could have made sense in terms of grabbing a grad transfer kid, similar to the way they grabbed Fitzner, although they didn't really have a scholarship for that once they did get Fitzner, unless they were going to run off a current player.
Yeah, in terms of Devontae Green, I wrote down a description for every player on Indiana in my notes, and well, except for Green, because I just don't even know like what to call him. Like he's fine. I mean, he can shoot a little bit. Like he was like a 34% 3-point shooter. He's solid. He's fine, but there's nothing really defining about his kind of characteristics, like his game. I think the one kind of freshman that could maybe outperform recruiting rankings would be Demezi Anderson, just because he's a good shooter and he has size to kind of play that 2 or 3 spot. So I could see, by the end of the season, because this is also a team that really needs more shooters. I could see like a Finney, Langford, and then Anderson with Morgan and De'Ron Davis to kind of add some more floor spacing there. I think he kind of fits in the roster maybe more than some guys who are higher ranked, like a Jerome Hunter, who may have to wait until Juwan Morgan is gone to see some serious minutes.
Yeah, just rotation wise, I think let's kind of dive into that. I think Morgan and Davis, once Davis is healthy, at least that's the clear 4 or 5 front court that they'll go with at least early in the year, with Fitzner coming off the bench in a rotation spot as a shooter. and then kind of duking it out if there's one more front court spot available between you would probably think that a guy like Justin Smith finds that last front court available spot in that like combo 3-4. And then point guard, I think Green will start the season there. Finney is the backup. Langford will start at the 2, and then you have to find a 3. I'll say I'll go hot take-ish and say Demezi Anderson starts at the 3 from day one.
Yeah, that's a good call. I went with point guard Devontae Green. I went with Durham at the 2. Just, I mean, you kind of mentioned with that 3 spot, has to be someone. I am kind of tempted to go Zach McRoberts at the 3 and Romeo at the 2, just because McRoberts started last year, partly because I think he can space the floor, and he's someone who doesn't make a lot of mistakes out there. He plays hard. But I mean, he's a walk-on, and you have 13 scholarship guys right now. I don't know. I have no idea how much Zach McRoberts will play this year. I penciled him into my current rotation. I could see him start. I could see him get 0 minutes a game. But yeah, and then I had Morgan and Davis in the front court, and then off the bench, Fitzner and Finney, obviously. Mentioned McRoberts. I did extend to 10 because I went Demezi Anderson and then Justin Smith there as that athletic combo forward who I think could play some small ball 5, or, I mean, it's semantics if he and Morgan are playing together. Who's the 4? Who's the 5?
Yeah, I was going to say I really like the idea of a Morgan Smith front court playing 4 and 5, both small, but both have kind of interesting skill sets with their athleticism. One guy we haven't touched on at all in this podcast that I did want to just briefly bring up is redshirt freshman Race Thompson, a former fringe top 150 recruit out of the state of Minnesota, who could factor in kind of that stretch 4 spot. I think Fitzner probably makes more sense this year. I don't expect Thompson to be in the rotation, but I did think it'd be good to bring him up. I do think we also have to just kind of touch on Romeo Langford, though. And what do you expect him to bring just on the floor for this team? Juwan Morgan was the primary scorer on this team last season, although Robert Johnson did a lot of scoring. I kind of see him replicating, almost replicating statistically what Robert Johnson did. I think in that range is about what I'd expect. Maybe a little bit more on the glass, a little less on the assist numbers. I think that's kind of where I am, just like from a pure like stats drawn up perspective as for what Romeo Langford will bring.
I was actually going to say exactly that Langford, probably averages that what, like 13, 14 points a game, maybe, shoots the ball well, either the leading scorer or the second leading scorer behind Juwan Morgan. I would think that Langford, Morgan, and Davis all score in double figures. And then if Devontae Green can kind of hold on to a role, whether it be a point guard or shooting guard or sixth man long term, maybe he gets in that 7 to 8 point per game range. But I think, with the hype surrounding Langford and people calling him the savior, that there may be a conception that he averages 20 points a game. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case. I think he could average in that 13, 14 point per game range and still be a very still have a very successful season and still be a top 10 draft pick and still kind of fulfill his expectations without being that kind of huge scorer.
Right. I think Langford, my best way of describing this is if Langford went to Kansas, not saying what would you project his stats, because obviously it's a different role, but what would you project like what he is as a player? Like, I think Indiana fans are automatically going to just jump on this. Like, Langford's a stud. Like, we've been watching him since he was in 9th grade. He's so good at, like, scoring and just, like, everything that they've seen from him over the last several years. But, like, if he went to Kansas where he was expected to just be, like, a typical 5-star recruit, what would we kind of expect from him? We'd expect a 3-level scorer and a high-level shot maker who can give them something defensively, create for others a little bit, and be an overall high-level starter, potentially all-conference player in their conference. And I think that's what we'd be projecting in that Robert Johnson scoring mold. Now, maybe he gets up to that 16 to 17 points a game. I don't think that's crazy. But some of these projections of 20 and 25 points a game, 25 is just ridiculous, but you never know with an Indiana fan. Just kind of like, I think we have to check expectations at the door with a guy like Romeo Langford, just because, he's dealt so well with the weight on his shoulders of the Indiana fans the last 4 years, but it'll be a different animal playing at Assembly Hall. And at the first struggle, what will be the reaction? I think that might be one of the more interesting storylines with this Indiana team, is just watching Romeo Langford and all the hype that surrounded him go play college basketball and struggle, because freshmen struggle in college basketball. Like even top recruits have ups and downs. And so looking forward to seeing that and seeing how he responds from the adversity that he probably hasn't really faced in his career.
Yeah, I think if he were at Kansas, I think he probably starts at the 2, kind of moves Grimes to like a 6-man role. He probably averages like 10 or 11 points a game, because like when you're making these projections, like you need your points per game to kind of equal between like 75 and 80 as a team. So like if just like kind of like rough estimates right now, like if Langford gets 14 and if Morgan gets 15 and if Davis gets 12, that's more than half right there. And then Archie Miller is someone who likes to use his bench. So there's 7 other guys there who could easily combine for 40 points per game, and then you're at 80 right there. So it's not too. I don't think it's too ridiculous to say he would average. Romeo Langford, that is, would average like 17 or 18 a game. I wouldn't even call you crazy if you said he was going to average 20, but I think it's also reasonable to kind of have him where we have him in that 14 to 15 point per game range. In terms of Race Thompson, who we touched on earlier, I had thought he was like a pure stretch 4, but kind of the more I watched, he kind of reminds me of like a Royce White or like a George Niang, where he's like this big physical guy. He likes to handle the ball. Like he really likes to pass the ball. He has good vision, likes to do like interior passing. And he kind of like dribbles into back downs and stuff. So, I've been trying to do more of these player comparisons, but probably the more that I do, the less quality some of them are. But I think maybe like a Royce White kind of George Niang mix for Race Thompson.
So let's make our kind of predictions overall on Indiana. Can they kind of overcome some of the struggles they had offensively from an efficiency perspective? They were not a good shooting team last year. They were not an efficient offense overall last year. Can they overcome that and meet the expectations of a lot of top 4 Big Ten love? I think there's been a ton of that preseason. Do you buy into that, and where do you really see them, and where does the composite see them? I think my guess is the composite has them as just outside the top 25.
You would be exactly right. So the composite has them tied for 27th with Florida, which is, I mean, that's so low for Florida in my opinion. There, that's mind-boggling to me that Florida's not included. But that puts them 1 behind Nebraska, which I think might even be more ridiculous. Nebraska's the first team out of the composite, but I think 27th for Indiana, I think, is appropriate. 6 people have them out of the 16 in the top 25. The highest person has them at number 20. So that's not. I don't think that that's too ridiculous. See who has them at number 20. That would be Aaron Torres. Aaron Torres is high on both of these teams that we're talking on today. But personally, I have them as kind of like an 8-9 seed, which would put them in that kind of 30 to 34-ish range. And I also have them 4th in the Big Ten behind the Michigans and then Wisconsin.
Right. That's kind of the thing for me is I see the Big Ten has the 2 Michigans who I think are like absolutely NCAA tournament teams, very likely top 25 teams, very possibly top 15 teams, and then a glut that could be seen as many as like 10 teams that have legitimate chances to make the NCAA tournament. I think Indiana, I would lean towards them being towards the front of that group, that glut of teams. I would say, I would say I see them in the kind of that 3 to 6 Big Ten range. outside of the top 25, but not significantly in the NCAA tournament. That's kind of where I am on them. But I mean, literally teams, everyone from an Indiana to a Purdue to Nebraska, who we've previewed on this podcast, to even like Wisconsin, as you mentioned, even teams like near the bottom that like we wouldn't necessarily expect, but like have legitimate chances to do it, like a Northwestern, an Iowa, like Illinois, like Minnesota, like that 4 teams. Like I don't think anyone will project them to be in the NCAA tournaments preseason, but they all have like the legitimate players to be in NCAA tournament teams, and all of them have coaches who've done it before. So that's what makes the Big Ten so interesting, is there's going to be almost no night offs. Like even Rutgers is not a pushover anymore. Rutgers is a legitimate basketball team that competes and gives you 40 minutes. So that's what I'm really excited about with the Big Ten, is just how wide open it is. And even I don't think Michigan State or Michigan will be unbeatable. I don't think anyone in the middle of that league is going to separate itself too much. So, I think tiebreakers are going to be really big in the Big Ten overall. So kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think the depth of the Big Ten is going to be its biggest strength. I was just trying to take like a kind of like a macro look at the Big Ten earlier, and I think that you can make a legitimate argument for 12 different teams to be NCAA tournament teams. I think any team besides Illinois and Rutgers, I think that there's like a legitimate, like well-reasoned argument to be made. I think they probably get. I'm just gonna go over again just to see how many I had, and I have 6 in, but I have Ohio State being like the first or second team out. But I mean Minnesota, Maryland, even like Penn State, Iowa, and Northwestern, as you touched on earlier, I think you can make an argument for all those teams to be included.
Yeah, I have like 7 bids. It's like I haven't done like a bracketology to tell you for sure, but like off the top of my head, this feels like a 6 to 8 bid league.
Yeah, and then I have Indiana as an 8 seed, and then the team right behind them in my rankings is Purdue, which I have, I think, on the same seed line. So that just kind of shows how closely bunched together the Big Ten is. I think that they should have a bounce back season.
And then we should just, as we do with all of our teams, just briefly, where are we on Archie Miller at Indiana? Obviously, Langford meant everything, and they're going to recruit well for 19. They're well involved on Trendon Watford, although I don't expect them to land him. This class is interesting in 2018 because it'll allow, obviously, the one-and-done hype man of Langford, but also some long-term pieces like a Demessi Anderson, like a Jerome Hunter, like a Finney, even a Jake Forrester. That'll allow this team to be in good shape long term. I think Archie Miller was the right hire at Indiana. I haven't wavered on that despite last season. I think anyone who judged them too much on what they did last season, and in terms of judging Archie Miller's credentials, didn't watch Archie Miller and didn't realize what he was left at Indiana. So that's kind of where I am. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on our man Archie Miller.
No, yeah, putting him on the hot seat would be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the things he did at Dayton. I mean, he made an Elite Eight, and I mean he's getting his guys in to kind of play that similar style with all these long versatile wings. Guys maybe like Jerome Hunter and Forrester and Thompson might not play a lot this year, but I mean these are legitimate long-term pieces. Just gonna look at who they're recruiting. I know that they have a visit, I think, coming up for James Bouknight, who's a top 100. He could shoot it, and he's super athletic. I think he would be a nice replacement for Langford when he inevitably goes pro. I know that they are recruiting Jalen Lake, who's like a top 10 recruit, combo guard, super athletic, not a shooter, I don't think. His recruitment's kind of fuzzy. Maybe Kentucky, maybe Oregon, maybe even NC State is involved, but I would think that they would have as good a chance as anyone with the minutes that they have to offer. And then Jamius Ramsey, I know that Louisville's involved there, but Louisville might be going elsewhere for their kind of guard spots. They already have Josh Nickelberry in the mix there in the backcourt, so maybe Indiana can land Ramsey too, and that'll be, they're also in deep with Trace Jackson Davis, who's a super long and athletic kind of energy center. He's like 6'9" with like a 7'4" wingspan.
Yeah, and they just offered Zeke Naji from Wisconsin, from I believe Wisconsin or Minnesota. It was like a long forward who is like a fringe top 50 recruit who Wisconsin's working hard on, but I don't know if they'll get. That's like a recent offer, I think, within the last like 3 days.
Kansas offered Zeke in NJ too, and then
and they offered Kyra Lewis, but they're not going to get him. It looks like Bama for Lewis.
Yeah,
he's announcing tomorrow. By the time most of you listen to this podcast, Kyra Lewis will be a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide, unless something stunning happens. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, but I think this the only guy that we didn't mention on this Indiana team is Clifton Moore, who only played in 9 games last year. But coming into last year, he was on the Draft Express mock. He was on the preseason mock draft in like the 50s. And that was, I mean, shocking to me. He was like a recruit in like the 200s. He's just like a skilled big who's like super like skinny and needs to put on a lot of weight. But that was mind blowing to see him in a preseason mock draft as a one and done.
Yeah, I remember with Moore, there was a lot of from draft Twitter people who were also like college basketball guys, like tweeting about how great a job that Archie Miller did keeping Clifton Moore, and how like Indiana was going to be in such great shape with Moore, and then he just didn't really show it last season so far. I mean, upside long term is still there. I just wouldn't expect him to impact the game too much, but would be a game changer if he is that type of transcendent talent that draft people think he is or will be at some point.
So anything to wrap up on the Hoosiers?
Not really. I think we pretty much summed it up. Both of us have them outside the top 25, but in the NCAA tournament, in the top half of the Big Ten, possibly the top 4. So thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week with another deep dive. Lots of fun stuff happening in college basketball the next week or so, with all these international trips and lots of chances to overreact to different things. So keep tuning in. We'll keep trying to produce good content that you guys enjoy. Thanks as always for listening. Thanks for listening to the Kyle Keller podcast. If you haven't done that, go give that a listen. Click on our page. Check that out. We're working really hard on setting up the RSS feed to get on iTunes, etc. That's just kind of a wait and see thing. We're trying to problem solve with a buddy, figure out what we can do to get this thing up as soon as possible. Obviously, I know it's a big deal to get on there, so we're hoping to do that, but especially before the season starts. But the quicker, the better. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your week. And we're only 3 months from college basketball, so just keep hanging in there.